right? They are themselves pushed away, and this is part of the story that is not usually told. And I think to understand Zionism, you have to understand the psyche and the history of the people that actually settled. They were actually driven into the mythical homeland, right? They didn't immigrate. Of course, the irony or tragedy of it is, of course, for centuries, any Jew could immigrate to Palestine, and it was opened. The minute they wanted to immigrate to Palestine, it closed, right? This is one of the many ironies of Israel-Palestine. Another one from the Palestinian side is when the British actually carved up the space and declared the existence of Palestine before they even conquered it, right? They already gave it to another, right? With the Balfour Declaration, the 2nd of November 1917, they actually create Palestine and give it to someone else. So you have a lot of contradictions here, right? So the Jews basically are escaping into their homeland, into their historical or mythical homeland. And I think this is a very, very important factor, and it's amplified later by the emigration from the Arab world. Close to half of the Jews come from the Arab world. They were driven out from the Arab world, sometimes with quite agreement by the Zionists, but nonetheless, it's a tragedy, a huge tragedy, I think, for both sides. For the Jews that were driven out, including my family that were driven out of Egypt penniless, and the Arab world too, that lost its Jewish population. So this is what happens then. In 1947-49, it becomes more violent, more brutal, with a massive transfer of Palestinians. Today we would call it ethnic cleansing. About 2/3 of the Palestinians became refugees in a war, in a civil war. And then with the involvement of the Arab armies, of course, Israel accepted the UN partition plan, and the Palestinian leadership that was already in the diaspora in exile, but nonetheless, and the Arab League rejected it. And this is important as a backcloth to these events. That, of course, shouldn't, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, shouldn't close the door for redress. And this is my point exactly. This is not beyond repair, but it's a very traumatic period coming right on the heels of the Second World War. And today, when we live actually what the political geographers call the period of long peace, right? We live in a very stable UN-governed world. With all our criticism, there are no world wars and no major wars. We are, of course, with many little conflicts. We cannot imagine, I think, the trauma and transformation that existed then for the Jews first and then for the Palestinians. The difference is that the Jews did construct a homeland, did construct a state that absorbed them and facilitated them with incredible help from the world community, and the Palestinians are left stateless until today. And this is, of course, the big imbalance and the big asymmetry. A lot of this, you know, is dialectical. Both the Jews and the Palestinians act in the world. None of them is passive. But there is an imbalance and asymmetric relation which come to bear today in the situation that I'm telling to you about. Then from 49 to 67, Israel develops very much like a normal ethnocracy. Very much like Malaysia or Estonia or Northern Ireland, all these countries that grab the state power that they won and try to dominate the whole territory and population. And in that period, I call it internal colonization, Israel actually built 600 settlements inside Israel proper to disperse the population to most of the Palestinian regions. And of course, there is also the refugee issue that is put on the back burner. And then after 67, Israel conquers the West Bank and Gaza, conquers more, but this is what interests us, and start to settle beyond its recognized border. And then we need to know international law, we need to know political geography to understand that this is actually almost classic form of colonialism. Only it's done 100 years after the European colonialism almost ceased to exist. So settling your own population, of course, it's defined by the Geneva Convention, Clause 49, by the Hague Convention, by all international law, is an illegal move. But yet Israel is doing it and continuing to do it until now, and creating a colonial situation, which, as I said, about 15 years ago, more or less got into a stalemate. Israel is still building, I mean, sometimes it's sort of, the people themselves build small settlements that are called ma'achazim, but they're not particularly serious. The massive infrastructure of colonizing the West Bank was built before 1993. It's about 120 supposedly legal settlements by Israeli terms, illegal by international terms, all the Judaization of East Jerusalem, and also continuing to settle the Arab regions inside Israel, including the Bedouin region. So all this is currently at a point where all sides are waiting for another move. But I think, and this is one of my messages, that we actually, without paying too much attention, we might tie the knot so tight that we'll move involuntarily into an apartheid situation that neither the Jews nor the Arabs want. But sometimes the forces that are on the ground, like those that prevent Netanyahu from continuing fulfilling his statement, are more powerful than the actors themselves. So this is the map of the UN partition plan, which is the blue area was supposed to be the Jewish state. The rest was supposed to be the Arab Palestinian state. What happened in the war of 1948, that Israel captured these brown areas, and that is the green line. Jerusalem, Bethlehem was supposed to be a corpus separatus, that is an autonomous, self-governing body with international umbrella. And as I'll show to you, I don't think it's irrelevant, this concept, until now. We need to move a little bit with time. Population is very important. This is on the left. I try to construct as a geographer a real map, not a distorted propaganda map, but a real map of ethnic control over space in Israel-Palestine. You see all the white spaces are land that has been declared Israeli or Jewish land. And I'll explain to you in a minute how. And I think this is a very fundamental foundation of the conflict now that is quite often not spoken about. The green areas, the green enclaves, this is Gaza, this is the West Bank, this is the Galilee and the Negev, are Palestinian controlled areas that, Palestinian population shrunk into this geography. And really, since 1967, Palestinian geography hardly changed. Israel holds it and freezes it as much as it can, while Jewish population expands as much as it can, and that's also slowing down. So you see how skewed it is. Between Jordan and sea, the Palestinians are nearly 50% of the population, 48% of the population, and they hold only 15% of the land. So 48 to 15, right? Inside the green line, the Palestinians are 18% of the population, and they control less than 3% of the land, about 2.8. So 18 to 2.8. This is very skewed, and this is a structural domination that is done through the courts, through planning, through settlement, and through the land regime. And I just illustrate it in some maps that will show you how Jewish settlement has expanded over the last century. This is up to 1947. There were about 300 settlements. Today there are about 1,100. Up to 1947, there were, as I said, the refugees, settlers, about 300. Then about up to 1967, about 900. And then since 1967, 200 more in the West Bank, Gaza. And in the last few years, a few small settlements that are not insignificant, but they're not in the big picture changing much. And at the same time, what happened to Palestinian geography? This was Palestinian geography in 1947, with about 900 villages and 15 cities. And this is what happened to it in 1967. You see how the Arab population was transferred from most of the area that is Israel. It actually was left in the areas that Israel thought would be, according to the UN partition plan, will go to the Palestinians. And this is famously the historian and my colleague Benny Morris, against which I debate quite a lot. He famously said that Israel made a mistake but not ethnically cleansing all the Palestinians. And to which I answer that it would just exacerbate, it would not help, it would just exacerbate the refugee problem. So we have a debate about that. But you can see in quite stark terms how this geography has changed over time. And then I put both of them together, so you see what in 1967 there was, if you like, there was a geography of partition still there. And this was still Jordan at the time. Then, of course, Jordan relinquished the West Bank to the Palestinians. And then in 2011, population are much more mixed and preventing much of what Netanyahu is, and other leaders at least declare they want to achieve. So how was that all done? I did a lot of research about land systems around the world. And it's quite fascinating how similar it is in terms of ethnocratic society, whether it will be Ireland, Estonia, Cyprus, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia. But in the interest of time, I actually constructed this morning a simplified version, because this is very technical. And a simplified version shows that in 1948, the Jews actually purchased 6% of the land of Israel. Okay? 6% that was sufficient to accommodate about 600,000 Jews, but on small enclaves. Currently, and 6% turned to 92%. It was actually higher, but now it's 92% of the land is state land. That's in Israel proper. In the West Bank, approximately 45% of the West Bank is declared state land. I just did a big report, big research about it, and was published in the B'Tselem site. You can have it online. And how did it happen? This is a massive increase from 6% to 92%, right? Now, it's state land, but the state is a Jewish state, right? So it acts as Jewish land. And not necessarily so. It could actually allocate the land also to the Palestinians. Sometimes it does. But mainly, the allocation is about 97, 98% to Jews. But first of all, the green arrows are to do with ownership. And the ownership of land, apart from the purchase, as we said, which was 6%, and mandate the British Empire land, which was another 2% of the land, very small land holdings. There were three other mechanisms. Registered Arab land was transferred to the Jewish state, mainly from the refugees. Now, the state of Israel is about 20 million dunams, which is large compared to Singapore, but it's very small compared to most states. But nonetheless, about 5 million, about a quarter of it was refugee property, registered refugee property. The UN did several studies. The Jarvis study is the most famous. Michael Fischbach, a scholar from the United States, repeated that study and found very similar results about 2-3 years ago. So that's about 5 million. Unregistered Arab land was actually in all kinds of ways confiscated, and mainly Bedouin land. And this, again, needs a little bit more elaboration, but that accounts to another at least 2 million dunams. And dead land, which is quite interesting, and that puts Israel in the category, in the family of settler societies. That's quite typically with the concept of terra nullius, that some of you might be familiar with. It's a legal concept that comes from Roman law, actually, but it translated to international law. And with the Berlin concept and with the Privy Council in London was enshrined until it was revoked in the mid-20th century. In fact, the UN report that revokes it is in 1975. So this is declaring the land dead. That is, there might be people on it. It might be theirs according to traditional law. They might even have papers for it, but they didn't register it with the sovereign, which would be the Ottoman or the British at the time. If they didn't register it, the land actually is declared dead. It's not properly possessed, and whoever possesses it, and even they can prove they possess it, they are considered to be trespassers. And this, by large, is the greater amount, is about 12.